The sensation arrives not as a sudden bolt of lightning, but as a soft, rhythmic drumming against the window pane of the subconscious. It is that peculiar, shimmering veil of familiarity that drapes itself over a moment, a conversation, a specific slant of golden light through a kitchen window, or the way a stranger's laughter echoes down a narrow street, leaving you suspended in the uncanny realization that you have been here before. We often dismiss this as a mere glitch in the biological hard drive of the brain, a synaptic misfire where memory and perception cross wires. Yet, if we lean into the silence of that realization, a more profound possibility begins to breathe. What if this sense of repetition is not a failure of the mind, but a signal from the architecture of reality itself? What if the feeling that you have lived this day before is the sound of two distinct streams of existence finally finding their confluence? A moment where your timeline has just merged. To explore this is to step away from the linear, mechanical clockwork of the modern world and enter a landscape where time is not a highway, but an infinite ocean of overlapping waves, constantly seeking a state of unified equilibrium. Imagine for a moment that your life is not a single, solitary thread being pulled through the needle of the present. Instead, visualize your existence as a vast tapestry of potentiality, where every choice, every hesitation, and every silent longing creates a secondary vibration, a ghost line of what might have been. These timelines are not distant, unreachable galaxies. They are parallel currents flowing just a fraction of a degree out of phase with your waking life. Usually, these currents remain separate, insulated by the heavy density of our physical expectations and the rigid structure of our daily routines. However, there are moments when the vibration of your soul, your intent, your suffering, or perhaps your deepest awakening, reaches such a high frequency that the barriers between these parallel paths begin to thin. Like two drops of water mercury rolling toward one another on a silver plate, these timelines tremble at the edge of contact until, with a sudden, silent snap, they become one. The result is a profound sense of recognition, a psychic resonance that we label as déjà vu, but which is actually the sensation of your consciousness reconciling two different versions of the same event into a single, solidified reality. This phenomenon suggests that we are not passive passengers on a predetermined track, but active navigators of a multidimensional sea. When you feel that strange, haunting echo of the past in a brand new moment, you are witnessing the collapse of the either-or into the is. It is as if you were reading two different drafts of the same poem, and suddenly, the words align so perfectly that the pages fuse together. This merging of timelines is often a response to a pivotal internal shift. When you outgrow an old version of yourself, the universe must recalibrate the external world to match your new internal architecture. The old timeline, which was predicated on your previous fears and limitations, must be folded into a new trajectory that can accommodate your expanded spirit. This folding process creates a ripple, a temporal double take that manifests as the feeling of living the day before. You are seeing the shadow of the timeline you just left behind as it merges into the brilliance of the one you are currently inhabiting. It is a cosmic homecoming, a gathering of the fragmented pieces of your journey into a more coherent and powerful whole. We live in a culture that prizes the tangible and the measurable. Yet even our most advanced physics hints at this fluidity. We speak of quantum superposition and the way observers influence the observed. Yet we rarely apply these majestic truths to the mundane fabric of our Tuesday afternoons. When we acknowledge the possibility of merging timelines, we begin to see our lives as a sacred dialogue with the infinite. The repetition you feel is a confirmation that you are on track, even if that track is far more complex than a simple straight line. It is a sign that the diverse versions of you, the version that stayed, the version that left, the version that dared, and the version that hid, are finally coming to a point of integration. This merger is not a repetition of the past, but an enrichment of the present. You are inheriting the wisdom and the energy of those other paths, drawing them into your current vessel so that you may move forward with a greater density of purpose and a more refined sense of self. To live in this awareness is to walk through the world with a different kind of eyes. No longer is a repetitive day a sign of stagnation. Instead, it becomes a holy site of cosmic convergence. You begin to look for the subtle differences in the relived moment, the small nuances that indicate how this version of the story is slightly more vibrant, more aligned, or more conscious than the one that came before. It is a process of refining the gold from the dross of your many possible lives. This introduction into the concept of timeline merging invites us to stop fearing the strange loops of our existence and to start greeting them as old friends. It is a call to recognize the immense power of our own consciousness to act as a magnet, drawing in the scattered rays of our potential and focusing them into a singular, burning light of presence. As we stand at this threshold, we must ask ourselves what it means to be the architect of such a vast and shifting reality, and how we can learn to steer our ship when the maps are constantly being rewritten by the very act of our journeying. The sensation of having lived this day before is the ultimate cosmic wink. It tells you that the walls of the labyrinth are not as solid as they seem, and that you are far more expansive than the body you inhabit. It suggests that the you who sits here reading these words is the culmination of 1,000 silent victories across a dozen different dimensions of possibility. By accepting that your timeline has just merged, you accept a greater responsibility for your reality. You are no longer a victim of circumstance, but a weaver of worlds. Every time you experience that haunting sense of the already seen, you are being invited to take a deep breath and realize that you have just leveled up in the grand game of existence. You have integrated a part of your soul that was previously wandering in the what-ifs, and you are now more whole, more centered, and more prepared for the mysteries that lie ahead. This is the beginning of a deeper understanding, a journey into the heart of time itself, where we discover that the end of one timeline is simply the dawn of a more magnificent integration. At the heart of this temporal convergence lies the concept of the pulsing now, a fundamental pillar that reimagines time not as a sequence of ticking seconds, but as a living, breathing lung that expands and contracts based on the depth of our awareness. In this framework, the feeling of having lived a day before is not a mental error, but a rhythmic contraction of the universe, bringing the distant echoes of parallel possibilities into the immediate center of your experience. We are taught to view time as a river flowing in one direction, a relentless march from the cradle to the grave. Yet the theme of timeline merging suggests a more circular, or perhaps spiral, geometry. The core theme here is the dissolution of linear constraint. When a merger occurs, the past is no longer behind you, and the future is no longer ahead. Instead, they are layers of a single, monumental verticality. This concept challenges our obsession with progress as a movement across space, suggesting instead that true evolution is a movement into deeper layers of the present moment. By feeling the repetition, you are actually sensing the depth of the moment's density, as if the fabric of the day has been folded over on itself to provide a thicker, more resilient foundation for your next leap. Closely entwined with this is the principle of harmonic resonance, which serves as the silent engine behind the merging process. Just as a singer can shatter a glass by matching its natural frequency, our internal, emotional, and spiritual states emit a specific vibration that acts as a beacon for corresponding realities. The theme of the merged timeline posits that when we achieve a significant breakthrough in our consciousness, perhaps finally forgiving an ancient debt or embracing a terrifying talent, we change our resonant frequency. This shift creates a vacuum that pulls in other versions of our life that are vibrating at that same elevated level. The repetition we feel is the tuning process, the moment where the gears of the new reality are clicking into place with the old. It is a transition from a discordant life of fragmented efforts into a symphonic existence where all your hidden potentials begin to hum in unison. This theme reminds us that we are the primary conductors of our reality. The world does not just happen to us, it vibrates with us. And when the vibration reaches a certain purity, the walls between what is and what could have been simply evaporate. Another guiding pillar in this exploration is the illusion of the singular self. We often operate under the assumption that we are a monolithic entity, a single I moving through a single world. However, the phenomenon of timeline merging reveals that the self is actually a collective, a vast assembly of selves existing across a spectrum of probability. The sense of déjà vu is the moment of the great gathering, where the mask of the individual slips and you glimpse the many versions of you that have been laboring in the shadows of other choices. This theme suggests that your identity is not a fixed point, but a fluid field of energy. When you feel you have lived this day before, it is because another version of you has lived it, and in that moment of merging, you are inheriting their memories, their scars, and their triumphs. This is not a loss of self, but a massive expansion. It implies that the wisdom we feel we have just gained may actually be a transfer of data from a parallel self that has already navigated these specific waters. We are, in essence, our own ancestors and our own descendants, constantly feeding information back and forth through the conduits of these temporal intersections. A third vital concept is the architecture of the witness, which addresses the role of consciousness as the ultimate observer that collapses the wave function of time. In the grand narrative of merging timelines, the repetition serves as a mirror held up to the observer. It asks us, now that you recognize the pattern, will you choose differently, or will you deepen the beauty of the act? This theme moves us away from the idea of time as a prison and toward the idea of time as a canvas. If you feel you are repeating a day, it is an invitation to step out of the autopilot of biological survival and into the high seat of the witness. From this vantage point, the repetition is a gift. It is a second chance to infuse the moment with a level of presence that was missing in the previous iteration. The core truth here is that the merger is triggered by awareness itself. The more conscious you become, the more your timelines begin to fold into one another, because a high state of awareness cannot be contained within the narrow, shallow banks of a single, uninspired life. It requires the volume and the power of multiple merged streams to sustain its brilliance. Finally, we must consider the concept of the cosmic correction, the idea that the universe possesses an inherent drive toward wholeness and efficiency. In the sprawling complexity of the multiverse, there are bound to be leaks or stray currents, versions of our lives that have become stuck in loops of trauma or stagnation. A timeline merger is often an act of cosmic grace, a way for the universe to prune the dead branches of our potential and graft the living ones onto our central trunk. The feeling of having been here is the sensation of the graft taking hold. It is the universe's way of ensuring that no ounce of our experience is wasted. Even our failures in parallel lives are recycled into the wisdom of our current one. This theme transforms our understanding of regret. If we are constantly merging with the versions of us that made the other choice, then we never truly missed out. We are simply waiting for the moment when that experience is ready to be integrated into our primary narrative. We are being woven back together, piece by piece, until the tapestry of our life reflects the full, unbroken light of our original intent. These themes, the pulsing now, harmonic resonance, the fluid self, the architecture of the witness, and the cosmic correction, form the skeletal structure of our understanding. They take the ghostly, fleeting sensation of the already lived and give it weight and purpose. They suggest that our lives are not a series of random accidents, but a sophisticated process of alchemical refinement. We are not just surviving time, we are digesting it, breaking it down, and rebuilding it into something that can eventually transcend the need for time altogether. As these concepts settle into our understanding, we move from the confusion of the glitch to the clarity of the merge. We begin to see that the feeling of repetition is the herald of a great coming together, a sign that the diverse fragments of our cosmic journey are finally finding their way home to the center of our being, where they will be forged into a destiny that is as inevitable as it is miraculous. To understand the merging of timelines is to listen to the myth of the master weaver, who sits at the center of the great labyrinth. In this ancient allegory, the weaver does not spin a single golden thread, but millions of silver filaments, each representing a breath, a choice, or a dream deferred. For eons, these threads are kept separate, vibrating in their own distinct chambers of the void. However, there comes a cosmic season, a moment of profound alignment, where the weaver begins to pull the threads toward a singular needle. As the silver filaments draw closer, they begin to hum with a collective memory. One thread remembers the cold of a winter it never truly endured in your physical world. Another remembers the warmth of a hand you never actually held. When these threads touch, a spark of recognition leaps between them. This is the moment you feel the already lived. It is the sensation of the silver filaments twisting into a cord of unbreakable strength. The story suggests that we are currently in a period of great braiding, where the thin, fragile versions of our lives are being reinforced by the presence of our other selves. We are not repeating the day because we are stuck. We are repeating it because the weaver is adding more substance to the fabric of our current reality, ensuring that the garment of our soul is thick enough to withstand the fires of true transformation. Consider also the parable of the two mirrors placed in a hall of infinite reflection. In this narrative, a traveler walks between the glass surfaces, seeing 1,000 versions of themselves stretching into the horizon. Each reflection is slightly different. One traveler wears a crown, another a shroud. One walks with a limp, and another dances. For most of the journey, the traveler is content to observe these ghosts as distant curiosities, separate and unreachable. But at a certain point in the hall, the mirrors begin to tilt inward. The reflections start to overlap. The traveler feels a strange vertigo, a sense that their physical body is being occupied by the movements of the reflected images. When the traveler raises a hand, they feel the weight of 1,000 hands rising with them. This symbolic overlapping is the essence of the merged timeline. The déjà vu is the moment the traveler realizes they are no longer just the person in the center, but the sum total of every reflection in the hall. The repetition is the calibration of the mirrors. The universe is tilting the glass so that the light of your consciousness is no longer scattered across 1,000 might-have-beens, but is instead focused into a single, blinding laser of I am. You are the traveler who has finally stopped looking at the reflections and has started becoming the light that creates them. In another sacred narrative, we find the image of the sleeping city. Imagine a vast metropolis where every street represents a different potential path of your life. In one district, you are a scholar. In another, a rebel. In a third, you are lost in the fog of a forgotten sorrow. Usually, these districts are separated by high walls and heavy gates, and the citizens of one never hear the songs of the others. But once every great cycle, the midnight sun rises, a light so intense that it dissolves the walls of the city. Suddenly, the scholar finds themselves standing on the rebel's street, holding the rebel's sword but keeping the scholar's mind. The rebel feels the scholar's peace while standing in the middle of a riot. This blending of environments is the psychic landscape of a timeline merger. When you feel you have lived this day before, you are standing in a district of your soul that was previously walled off. The familiarity is the soul recognizing its own architecture, even if the ego claims it has never walked these streets. The merge is the city becoming a single, unified home, where every room is accessible and every memory is shared. It is the end of the internal exile, a homecoming where the you who failed and the you who succeeded finally sit down at the same table to break bread. There is also the metaphor of the symphonic correction. Imagine an orchestra playing a complex piece of music where every musician is in a different room, unable to hear the others. They are all playing the same symphony, but their timing is slightly off, creating a chaotic, ghost-like echo that ripples through the building. The conductor, representing the higher self, realizes that the music cannot reach its crescendo in this fragmented state. With a single strike of the baton, the walls of the rooms vanish, and the musicians are suddenly thrust onto a single stage. In that first moment of unification, there is a profound sense of double sound. The musicians hear the echo of what they just played, merging with the live note they are currently striking. This is the auditory equivalent of the timeline merger. The repetition is the echo of the parallel performance catching up to the live broadcast of your life. It feels like you've heard this melody before, because you have, but never with this much volume, and never with this many instruments playing in harmony. The merger is the transition from a solo performance to a full, cosmic orchestration of your destiny. Finally, we contemplate the narrative of the river and the delta. A river flows toward the sea, but as it nears the end of its journey, it splits into a dozen different channels, each winding through the silt and sand toward the salt water. Each channel thinks it is the true river, separate from its brothers. But when the tide comes in, the ocean pushes back against the land, flooding the delta and erasing the boundaries between the channels. For a brief moment, the water flows backward, and the river feels the memory of the other paths it didn't take, now saturated with the same brine. This tidal surge is the timeline merger. The feeling of the day before is the salt water of the infinite ocean flowing back into the fresh water of your linear life. It is the moment where the destination, the vast, eternal sea, claims the journey. The merger happens because you have finally come close enough to the end of a certain cycle that the divisions of the path no longer matter. You are being washed over by the totality of your existence, losing the narrow identity of the channel and gaining the expansive power of the tide. This symbolic flooding is not a drowning, but a liberation. It is the moment the river realizes it was always the ocean in disguise. Through these narratives, we see that the repetition of the day is a profound symbolic event. Whether it is the braiding of threads, the tilting of mirrors, the dissolving of city walls, the unification of the orchestra, or the surging of the tide, the message remains the same. Wholeness is your natural state, and time is the tool used to piece you back together. The sense of living a day before is the click of the puzzle pieces finding their fit. It is the universe's way of telling you that the fragmentation is over and the masterpiece is beginning to emerge. We are no longer wandering in the dark corridors of what if. We are standing in the bright hall of all at once. This symbolic understanding prepares us to look at our daily lives not as a series of chores to be completed, but as a sacred ritual of integration, where every repeated moment is an opportunity to reclaim a lost part of our divine heritage. When the ethereal concept of a merged timeline descends from the heights of cosmic philosophy and lands on the pavement of our daily existence, it transforms the way we interact with the mundane. The first and most vital practical integration is the cultivation of a heightened, non-linear presence. If you find yourself in the grip of that haunting familiarity, the most effective real-world response is to pause and acknowledge the double exposure of the moment. Instead of brushing it off as a mental quirk, you treat it as an invitation to exert your will. In a merged timeline, your agency is doubled because you are essentially operating with the combined momentum of two paths. This means that any decision you make in that moment carries twice the weight and twice the potential for manifestation. When you feel you have lived this day before, use that recognition as a signal to break a habit. If you usually respond to a certain stressor with frustration, and the previous version of the day felt heavy with that emotion, this is your opportunity to consciously choose peace. By doing so, you are not just changing one moment, you are rewriting the frequency of the newly merged stream, ensuring that the trajectory moving forward is steered by your highest intentions rather than your oldest echoes. This understanding also brings a radical shift in how we handle the concept of missed opportunities and regret. In a world of merging timelines, the one that got away is never truly gone. It is simply vibrating in a parallel lane, waiting for the moment of convergence. Practically, this means we can stop mourning the choices we didn't make and start preparing ourselves to receive the wisdom those choices generated. If you feel a sudden, unexplainable mastery of a skill you've barely practiced, or a deep intuitive understanding of a person you've just met, you are likely experiencing the data transfer of a timeline merger. The real-world takeaway is to trust these unearned insights. You have already done the work in a parallel iteration of yourself, and now that the timelines have fused, you are being granted the dividend of that labor. Integration means accepting this expanded capacity without the need for a linear explanation. It allows you to move through your career, your relationships, and your creative pursuits with a mysterious confidence, knowing that you are backed by the collective experience of your multidimensional self. Furthermore, the realization of a merged timeline serves as a powerful antidote to the modern epidemic of hustle culture and the anxiety of stagnation. When we feel like we are repeating ourselves, our cultural programming tells us we are failing or falling behind. However, the cosmic perspective reveals that these periods of apparent repetition are actually moments of intense consolidation. It is the universe saving its progress. Practically, this allows us to lean into the slow days with a sense of sacred purpose. If today feels exactly like yesterday, perhaps it is because the foundations of your new reality need to be cured like concrete before you can build the next story. The implication here is a return to deep time, where we value the quality of our presence over the quantity of our actions. We begin to look at our routines, the morning coffee, the commute, the evening walk, not as empty loops, but as the rhythmic stitches that bind our various timelines together. This turns the ordinary life into a meditative practice, where the goal is not to escape the day, but to inhabit it so completely that its hidden dimensions finally reveal themselves. In our relationships, this concept fosters a profound sense of empathy and knowing. Have you ever looked at a long-term partner or a close friend and felt a sudden surge of a different history with them? This is often the result of a timeline merger, where two different versions of a relationship have folded into one. The practical application of this is to remain open to the changing flavor of your connections. When timelines merge, people often change their behavior overnight because they, too, are integrating new aspects of their parallel selves. By recognizing the fluidity of the timeline, we stop holding people hostage to their past versions. We allow for the possibility of instant healing, where a conflict that has lasted for years suddenly dissolves because the timeline containing that conflict has been merged into one where the lesson has already been learned. This allows for a more fluid, dynamic, and forgiving way of relating to others, grounded in the awareness that we are all works in progress across multiple fronts of reality. Finally, the practical integration of this phenomenon involves the refinement of our vibrational hygiene. Since mergers are triggered by harmonic resonance, the state of our internal world, our thoughts, our emotions, and our silent prayers acts as the steering wheel for which timelines we pull toward us. If we dwell in a state of lack or fear, we tend to merge with timelines that reinforce those limitations, creating a Groundhog Day effect of struggle. Conversely, by maintaining a frequency of gratitude and curiosity, we act as a magnet for timelines where abundance and synchronicity are the norms. The real-world implication is that our internal state is the most practical tool we possess. It is not woo-woo or abstract. It is the fundamental technology of reality navigation. Every time you feel that glimmer of already lived, it is a feedback loop from the universe, asking you if you like the direction of the merge. If the feeling is one of heavy repetition, it is a call to elevate your thoughts. If it is one of magical recognition, it is a call to go deeper. We become the active editors of our own existence, choosing which scenes to keep and which to rewrite through the simple, powerful act of choosing our current vibration. As we integrate these insights, the world stops being a cold, mechanical place and begins to feel like a living, responsive intelligence. The glitch becomes a grace. We move from a state of being lost in time to being masters of timing. This section of the journey is about taking the mystical and making it functional, ensuring that our spiritual awakenings actually improve the quality of our waking life. By treating every repeated moment as a site of potential power, we transform the mundane into the miraculous, and we begin to walk through our days with the quiet, steady strength of someone who knows that they are exactly where they have always been, and yet they are arriving for the very first time. We stand now at the precipice of a new understanding, gazing out over the landscape of a life that is no longer a straight line, but a radiant, multifaceted diamond. Through this exploration, we have come to see that the haunting echo of the already lived is not a ghost to be feared, but a herald of our own burgeoning wholeness. To feel that your timeline has merged is to receive a profound cosmic validation. It is the universe's way of whispering that you have successfully navigated the labyrinth of choice and are now ready to inherit the integrated power of your many selves. We have moved through the introductory shivers of recognition, delved into the core themes of harmonic resonance and the pulsing now, walked through the symbolic halls of tilted mirrors and braided silver threads, and finally grounded those celestial truths into the soil of our daily practice. What remains is the final alchemy, the transformation of this knowledge into a lived philosophy that changes the very atoms of your future. The conclusion we must reach is that there are no lost versions of you. Every path you didn't take, every no that felt like a door slamming shut, and every yes that led to a temporary dead end was simply a tributary winding its way back to the main river of your consciousness. When you experience the merger, you are witnessing the homecoming of your own energy. This realization demands a total surrender of the heavy luggage of regret. If all timelines eventually find their confluence in the sea of the present, then nothing has been truly squandered. You are the beneficiary of a vast, invisible intelligence that is constantly working to reconcile your fragments. This is the ultimate comfort, that the architecture of reality is designed for your completion, not your diminishment. The sense of repetition is the click of the cosmic seatbelt, ensuring you are locked into a trajectory of purpose before the next great acceleration begins. This brings us to the transformational call, a summons to live as a timeline architect rather than a mere passenger of fate. From this moment forward, when the shimmering veil of familiarity descends upon your day, do not simply watch it pass. Instead, step into the center of that moment with a fierce and joyful intentionality. Understand that in that specific pocket of time, the walls between what was and what can be are at their thinnest. This is your 0 point, the space where you can broadcast a new signal that will resonate across all the newly merged layers of your life. The call is to move through the world with the poise of a being who knows they are backed by an infinite history. You are invited to stop playing small, to stop apologizing for your intuitive leaps, and to start trusting the unearned wisdom that bubbles up from the depths of your merged subconscious. You are a composite being, a symphony of experiences, and the world is waiting for the full volume of your integrated song. Consider the profound liberation that comes with this perspective. If you have lived this day before, then you are already an expert in this moment. You can afford to be braver. You can afford to be kinder. You can afford to be more radically authentic because the worst-case scenario has already been lived, processed, and merged into the wisdom you carry right now. The transformational shift is one from anxiety to curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening again?" you begin to ask, "What new depth am I being asked to bring to this familiar stage?" This turns every mundane routine into a high-stakes ritual of self-creation. You are no longer waiting for a big break or a distant salvation. You are realizing that salvation is the process of reclaiming the pieces of yourself that you left behind in the what-ifs. The merger is the salvation. The repetition is the bridge. As we conclude this immersion, look around your current environment with fresh eyes. The chair you sit in, the air you breathe, the thoughts currently swirling in your mind. All of these are the results of a magnificent, multi-dimensional convergence. You are a masterpiece of temporal engineering. The call to action is simple, yet infinite. Stay awake to the echoes. Treat every instance of deja vu as a holy communion, a moment where the divine and the human, the parallel and the present, kiss. Use that energy to fuel a life of radical presence. When you leave this space and return to the flow of your afternoon, do not be surprised if the light looks a little brighter or if the faces of strangers seem a little more familiar. You are walking in a world where the boundaries have shifted, and you are carrying the strength of 1,000 versions of yourself in a single pair of shoes. The journey of the merged timeline is the journey toward the one. It is the slow, beautiful process of the many becoming the unified, of the scattered becoming the focused, and of the seeker becoming the sought. You have lived this day before so that you might live it better this time, with more heart, more fire, and a more profound sense of the miracle that it is to simply exist. The tapestry is being woven, the mirrors are being aligned, and the orchestra is finally in tune. All that is left for you to do is to take your place at the center of the merge and breathe. You are here, you are whole, and you are finally, gloriously, on time. Embrace the echo, for it is the sound of your own soul calling you home to the magnificent, eternal now.